Hey everyone, imagine this. A family of four heads out for a weekend trip into the mountains, their SUV packed with camping gear, snacks, and excitement for a break from the daily grind. The sun's shining, the kids are laughing in the back seat, and the parents are dreaming of starry nights by a campfire. But then, poof, they vanish. No trace, no calls, no sign of their car. Search teams comb the rugged trails, helicopters buzz overhead, and the small mountain town nearby is buzzing with worry. Weeks pass, hope fades, and the mystery deepens. Then, 3 weeks later, a wildlife camera buried deep in the forest captures something that makes everyone's jaw drop. What was it? Hold that thought, because before we get there, I want to take you on a different journey. One that starts with a simple act of kindness on a crowded bus and ends with a note that changes a life forever. 2 stories, 1 video, both packed with twists you won't see coming. Stick with me because you're not going to believe how these connect. Picture this crisp autumn morning in a small town nestled at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The Carter family, Mike, Sarah, and their 2 kids, 12-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Liam, are the kind of folks everyone knows. Mike's the high school football coach, always quick with a joke. Sarah's a nurse who's patched up half the town at some point. Emma's got her nose in a book most days, and Liam? He's the kid who's always got a soccer ball at his feet. They're not perfect, but they're tight-knit, the kind of family that plans trips like this one to unplug and just be together. They've been talking about this camping trip for months, hyping it up over dinner, mapping out hikes, and even picking out the perfect spot by a lake. They left on a Friday, waving to neighbors as they pulled out of their driveway. "See you Monday," Sarah called out. But Monday came and they didn't. The town was stunned. Missing persons posters went up faster than you could blink. Volunteers scoured the trails, and the local news ran story after story. The Carter's SUV was found a week later, parked at a trailhead, but it was empty. No gear, no clues. Just a locked car sitting there like it was waiting for them to come back. Theories started swirling. Did they get lost? Was it an accident? Something worse? The mountains are beautiful, but they're no joke. Steep cliffs, dense forests, and bears aren't exactly rare. Search teams pushed deeper, but the days dragged on with nothing. Sarah's sister, Jenny, refused to give up, camping out at the sheriff's office, begging for answers. "They're out there," she'd say, tears in her eyes. "I know they are." But 3 weeks in, even she was starting to lose hope. That is, until that wildlife camera lit up with something no one expected. Now, let's hit pause on the Carters for a second and jump to a different scene, one that feels worlds away, but somehow ties into this mystery. It's a hot afternoon in the city, and 17-year-old Jaden's on a packed bus, heading home from his part-time job at a grocery store. Jaden's a good kid, works hard, helps his mom with bills, and dreams of getting into college someday. He's standing, holding onto the rail, when a pregnant woman steps on, looking exhausted. The bus is full, no seats left, and people are avoiding eye contact like it's an Olympic sport. Jaden doesn't think twice. "Ma'am, take my seat," he says, flashing a shy smile. She hesitates, then sits, thanking him softly. As she gets off at her stop, she slips a folded piece of paper into his hand and says, "You're gonna need this." Jaden's confused but stuffs it in his pocket, figuring it's just a thank you note. Later that night, he opens it, and his heart stops. What's written there isn't just words, it's a game changer, something that could rewrite his future. But what does it have to do with a missing family in the mountains? Back to the Carters. The wildlife camera that caught something wasn't just any trail cam. It was set up by a local biologist tracking bear migration, tucked away in a part of the forest so remote it's barely touched by hikers. When the footage hit the sheriff's desk, it sent a jolt through the whole investigation. Was it the Carters? A clue? Something else entirely? The town was buzzing again, but this time, it wasn't just worry, it was fear. What could be out there in those woods that kept a whole family hidden for weeks? And how does Jaden's note, scribbled by a stranger on a bus, connect to a mystery unfolding hundreds of miles away? I'm not going to spoil it yet, but let's just say these 2 stories collide in a way that'll leave you speechless. So, here's where we're at. A family's gone, a camera's caught something wild, and a kid's holding a note that's about to turn his world upside down. 2 stories, 1 truth, and a twist that ties them together. What did the camera see? What's in Jaden's note? And how do these moments, so far apart, end up weaving into the same incredible tale? Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stick with me for the full story. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. The small town of Pine Hollow hadn't seen anything like the Carters' disappearance in decades. Nestled in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, it was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your dog's name, and what you ordered at the diner on Sundays. But now, the cozy streets felt heavy with unease. Missing persons posters with Mike, Sarah, Emma, and Liam's smiling faces were taped to every lamppost, fluttering in the chilly October wind. The local diner, usually buzzing with gossip over coffee, had gone quiet, with folks whispering theories instead of their usual small talk. Some said the Carters got lost on a trail. Easy to do in those dense woods. Others wondered if they'd run into trouble, maybe a bear or something worse. A few older folks, the ones who'd grown up hearing tales of the mountains, muttered about things that didn't quite add up, like strange lights in the forest or old legends about people vanishing without a trace. The sheriff, a gruff man named Tom Hargrove, tried to keep everyone calm, but even he looked rattled. "We're doing everything we can," he'd say at the daily press briefings, his voice steady but his eyes tired. 3 weeks in, though, everything hadn't been enough. Jenny, Sarah's older sister, was the heart of the search effort. She wasn't from Pine Hollow, she lived a few hours away in Richmond, but she'd practically moved into the town hall, organizing volunteers and hounding the sheriff for updates. Jenny was the opposite of Sarah in a lot of ways. Where Sarah was soft-spoken and warm, Jenny was fierce, the kind of person who'd stare down a storm and win. She'd always been protective of her little sister, and now, with Sarah and her family gone, Jenny was a force of nature. She spent her days trekking the trails with search teams, her boots caked in mud, and her nights poring over maps and police reports. They didn't just disappear. She'd tell anyone who'd listen. Sarah's too smart for that. Mike knows those trails like the back of his hand. Something happened. Her voice would crack on that last word, but she'd push through, refusing to let the tears win. The volunteers admired her grit, but privately, some were starting to wonder if she was chasing ghosts. The mountains were vast, and the Carters' trail had gone colder than the autumn air. The SUV was the only real clue, and it didn't tell them much. Found at the trailhead of Blackthorn Ridge, it was locked tight, with no signs of a struggle. The keys were gone. The camping gear was missing, and the only thing out of place was a single granola bar wrapper on the passenger seat, Liam's favorite kind, the chocolate chip ones he'd begged for at the store. The police combed the area for days, but the ridge was a maze of rocky paths and thick pines that seemed to swallow any trace of the family. Divers even checked the nearby lake, its surface like glass under the gray sky, but found nothing. The search teams pushed deeper into the forest, calling out names until their voices went hoarse. Every snapped twig or rustle in the bushes sent hearts racing, but it was always just a deer or the wind. By week 3, the volunteers were dwindling, and even the news crews were packing up. Pine Hollow was starting to feel like a town holding its breath, waiting for a miracle, or dreading something worse. Then came the wildlife camera. Tucked away in a remote corner of the forest, it was one of dozens set up by Dr. Ellen Wade, a biologist studying bear migration patterns. Ellen was a local, born and raised in Pine Hollow, and she'd been helping with the search when she wasn't checking her cameras. She'd almost forgotten about the one on Blackthorn Ridge. It was so far off the beaten path that she only checked it every few months. But when she pulled the memory card and plugged it into her laptop, her hands started shaking. The footage was grainy, time-stamped just 3 days ago, and it showed something. Not a bear, not a deer, but a flicker of movement that didn't make sense. Shadows that looked almost human moving too fast, too strange. Ellen called the sheriff right away, and by nightfall, the station was buzzing again. The footage wasn't clear enough to say it was the Carters, but it was enough to make everyone wonder. What else was out there in those woods? And why hadn't anyone seen it before? Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in the city, Jaden was still reeling from the note in his pocket. He'd read it a dozen times that night, sitting on his bed in the tiny apartment he shared with his mom, Keisha. The words were simple, handwritten in neat cursive. "You're meant for more. Call this number. Trust me." Below it was a phone number with an area code he didn't recognize. Jaden wasn't the type to get his hopes up. Life had taught him to keep expectations low. Growing up, it was just him and Keisha, scraping by on her nurse's aide salary and his part-time job. College felt like a pipe dream, even though he was pulling straight A's at school. But that note? It felt like a door cracking open, just a sliver, to something bigger. He didn't know the woman from the bus, blonde, maybe in her 30s, with tired eyes but a kind smile. She hadn't said much, just thanked him and handed him the paper. Why him? Why now? He wanted to call the number, but something held him back. What if it was a scam? Or worse, what if it was real, and he wasn't ready for whatever came next? Keisha noticed something was off when Jaden barely touched his dinner. "What's with you, baby?" she asked, leaning across the kitchen table. Her voice was warm but sharp. She could always tell when he was hiding something. Jaden hesitated, then slid the note across to her. She read it, her eyebrows knitting together. "You sure this ain't some kind of trick?" she asked, but her tone wasn't dismissive. Keisha had always believed in signs, in moments that felt like fate. She'd raised Jaden to work hard, but also to listen to his gut. "Call it," she said finally. "Worst case, it's nothing. Best case," she trailed off, a small smile tugging at her lips. Jaden nodded, but he didn't pick up the phone. Not yet. The note felt heavy, like it carried more than just words. And deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to something bigger, something he couldn't quite see yet. Back in Pine Hollow, the wildlife camera footage had lit a spark, but it wasn't the breakthrough everyone hoped for. Sheriff Hargrove called in a tech team to enhance the video, but the results were frustratingly vague. The shapes in the footage could have been people, or they could have been shadows playing tricks. The timestamp placed it at 2:17 a.m. when the forest was pitch black except for the camera's infrared. Ellen, the biologist, was adamant it wasn't animals. "I know bears," she told the sheriff, her voice steady but urgent. "I know deer, coyotes, everything out here. This wasn't any of those." She didn't say it out loud, but she was thinking of the stories her grandfather used to tell, tales of the mountains hiding things that didn't belong, things that moved in the dark and left no tracks. Most folks in town dismissed those stories as old superstition, but Ellen wasn't so sure anymore. She'd seen the footage, and it gave her chills she couldn't shake. The search kicked into high gear again, with fresh volunteers pouring in from neighboring towns. Jenny was out there every day, her face drawn but determined. She'd started having dreams about Sarah, vivid ones where her sister was calling out from somewhere deep in the forest. In the dreams, Sarah's voice was clear, but the words were jumbled, like a radio signal cutting in and out. Jenny didn't tell anyone about the dreams. She didn't want to sound crazy, but they pushed her harder. She started hiking alone, ignoring the sheriff's warnings about sticking with the group. "I'm not losing them," she told a volunteer who tried to stop her. "I can't." The volunteer didn't argue. No one did. Jenny's pain was like a force field, keeping everyone at a distance but drawing them in at the same time. The mountains themselves seemed to be holding secrets. Blackthorn Ridge was notorious among locals, not for anything specific, just a feeling. Hikers would come back saying they felt watched, or they'd hear noises that didn't sound like animals. One old-timer, a retired park ranger named Gus, swore he'd seen something years ago on that ridge. Something tall, moving too smoothly through the trees. "Not a man, not a beast," he'd mutter over his coffee at the diner. Most people laughed it off, but after the Carters vanished, Gus's stories didn't seem so funny anymore. The wildlife camera footage only fueled the whispers. Some folks started avoiding the trails altogether, while others, the curious ones, showed up with their own cameras, hoping to catch whatever was out there. Pine Hollow was splitting, half scared, half obsessed, and all of them desperate for answers. Jaden, meanwhile, was wrestling with his own mystery. He'd finally worked up the nerve to call the number from the note, late one night when Keisha was at her shift. His hands were sweaty as he dialed, half expecting it to be a dead end. The phone rang twice before a man's voice answered, calm and professional. "Hello, Jaden," the man said, like he'd been expecting the call. Jaden froze. He hadn't said his name. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice sharper than he meant it to be. The man chuckled softly. "Someone who knows you're special. Meet me tomorrow, 3 p.m., at the coffee shop on 5th. You'll understand everything then." The line went dead before Jaden could ask more. He sat there, staring at the phone, his heart pounding. Special? How did this guy know his name? And what did any of this have to do with the woman on the bus? He thought about telling Keisha, but she'd worry, and she had enough on her plate. Instead, he tucked the note under his pillow and lay awake, wondering if he was about to step into something he couldn't undo. The next morning in Pine Hollow, the sheriff called a town meeting to update everyone on the search. The community center was packed, with folks spilling out into the hallway. Sheriff Hargrove stood at the front, his hat in his hands, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "We're following every lead," he said, his voice steady but strained. "The footage from the wildlife camera is unusual, but we're analyzing it. We've got more teams heading out tomorrow, and we're bringing in a specialist from the state." He didn't mention what the footage showed, and that silence only made the room more tense. Jenny was in the back, arms crossed, her eyes locked on the sheriff. She wanted to believe him, but she'd heard too many promises that led nowhere. As the meeting broke up, she overheard a couple of teenagers whispering about the footage, saying they'd seen a clip online. Someone had leaked it. Jenny's stomach twisted. She hadn't seen it yet, and the thought of strangers gawking at her family's fate made her want to scream. She pulled out her phone, searching for the clip, but all she found were blurry screenshots and wild theories. Bigfoot, aliens, government cover-ups. None of it made sense, but it fed the growing unease in her chest. Back in the city, Jaden was on his way to the coffee shop, his stomach in knots. He told Keisha he was meeting a friend from school, which wasn't exactly a lie, but felt like one. The coffee shop on 5th was busy, with students typing on laptops and baristas calling out orders. Jaden scanned the room, unsure who he was looking for. Then a man in a gray suit waved him over from a corner table. He was older, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. "Jaden, right?" he said, standing to shake his hand. Jaden nodded, sitting down, but keeping his guard up. How do you know me?" he asked. The man leaned back, sipping his coffee. Let's just say I've been watching people like you, people with potential. That note? It's an invitation. To something bigger than you can imagine. Jaden's mind raced. Potential? Invitation? He wanted answers, but the man's vagueness only raised more questions. What's this got to do with the lady on the bus? He pressed. The man's smile tightened. Everything. And nothing. You'll see. He slid a business card across the table, blank except for a single word. Horizon. Jaden stared at it, feeling like he'd just stepped off a cliff. In Pine Hollow, the search was taking a darker turn. The specialist from the state arrived, a woman named Dr. Clara Voss, a forensic investigator with a reputation for cracking impossible cases. She didn't waste time with small talk, diving straight into the wildlife camera footage. In a closed meeting with the sheriff and Ellen, she pointed out details no one else had noticed. The shadows moved in a pattern, almost coordinated, like they were circling something. This isn't random, she said, her voice low. Whatever's out there, it's not just wandering. Ellen felt a chill. She'd spent years in those woods, but she'd never seen anything like this. Clara wanted to set up more cameras, but she warned against sending too many people into the area.
We don't know what we're dealing with, she said.
And we don't want to spook it. The sheriff nodded, but Ellen caught the look in his eyes. Fear, mixed with something else. Doubt? Guilt? She couldn't tell, but it stuck with her. Jenny, meanwhile, was out on Blackthorn Ridge again, alone this time. She'd found a trail the search teams hadn't checked yet, a narrow path overgrown with brambles. Her boots crunched on the frost-covered ground as she moved deeper into the forest, her breath visible in the cold air. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she felt it, something pulling her forward, like Sarah's voice in her dreams. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches blocking out the sun. She was about to turn back when she saw it. A scrap of fabric caught on a thorn, bright blue, like the jacket Emma had been wearing in the last photo Jenny saw. Her heart stopped. She reached for it, her hands trembling, but before she could touch it, a sound broke the silence, a low, guttural hum that didn't sound human. It was close, too close, and Jenny froze, her breath caught in her throat. Whatever was out there, she wasn't alone. Jenny's heart pounded in her chest as the low hum echoed through the trees, vibrating in the still air of Blackthorn Ridge. She stood frozen, her hand inches from the scrap of blue fabric snagged on the thorn. The sound wasn't like anything she'd heard before, not an animal, not the wind, not even the distant rumble of a car. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong in these woods. Her eyes darted around, scanning the shadows between the pines, but nothing moved. The forest had gone deathly quiet, as if every bird and bug had held its breath. Jenny's instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. That fabric, it had to be Emma's. She couldn't leave it. She took a shaky step forward, her fingers brushing the cloth, when the hum stopped abruptly. The silence was worse. She grabbed the fabric, stuffing it into her pocket, and bolted back down the trail, her boots slipping on the frost. She didn't look back, but she could feel something watching her, a weight that pressed against her spine until she reached the trailhead, gasping for air. She didn't tell anyone about the hum. Not yet. She wasn't sure what she'd heard, and the last thing she needed was people thinking she was losing it. But that fabric? It was real. And it meant her family was out there, somewhere. Back in Pine Hollow, the town was spiraling into a mix of fear and fascination. The leaked wildlife camera footage had spread like wildfire online, turning the Carters' disappearance into a viral mystery. Teenagers huddled in the diner, scrolling through grainy screenshots on their phones, while their parents argued over whether it was a hoax or something darker. The footage showed those strange, almost human shadows moving in a way that made your skin crawl, too quick, too fluid, like they were gliding instead of walking. Dr. Clara Voss, the forensic investigator, was holed up in the sheriff's office, analyzing every frame. She hadn't slept in 2 days, her desk littered with coffee cups and maps of Blackthorn Ridge. There's a pattern, she told Sheriff Hargrove, pointing at her laptop screen. These shapes, they're not random. They're circling something, like they're guarding it. Hargrove rubbed his temples, his face etched with exhaustion. Guarding what, Clara? He asked, his voice low. She didn't answer, just zoomed in on a blurry frame where one shadow seemed to pause, its head tilted as if looking right at the camera. Ellen Wade, the biologist, was there too, and she felt a chill crawl up her arms. She'd spent her life studying these woods, but this was something else. Something that didn't fit. The sheriff was under pressure now, not just from the town but from the state. News vans were back, parked along Main Street, and reporters were knocking on doors, asking for quotes. Pine Hollow wasn't used to this kind of attention, and it was tearing at the seams. Some folks, like old Gus, the retired ranger, were feeding the frenzy with their stories. He'd started showing up at the diner every morning, telling anyone who'd listen about the things he'd seen on Blackthorn Ridge decades ago. They move like they don't touch the ground, he'd say, his eyes distant. And they don't like being seen. Most people rolled their eyes, but a few listened, especially the younger crowd, who were starting to sneak out to the ridge at night, hoping to catch their own footage. The sheriff had to post deputies at the trailhead to keep them away, but it didn't stop the rumors. People were talking about everything from lost hikers to secret government experiments hidden in the mountains. Jenny overheard it all, but kept her focus on that scrap of fabric. She hadn't shown it to anyone yet, not even the sheriff. It felt personal, like a message from Sarah, and she wasn't ready to share it. Meanwhile, in the city, Jaden was trying to make sense of his meeting at the coffee shop. The man in the gray suit, Mr. Ellis, he'd called himself, had left him with more questions than answers. That single word on the business card, Horizon, was burned into his mind. He'd gone home and Googled it, but nothing came up, no company, no organization, just vague references to a dozen unrelated things. Keisha could tell he was rattled when he got back to the apartment. "You met him, didn't you?" she asked, setting down her mug of tea. Jaden nodded, sliding the card across the table. "He knew my name, Ma, before I even said it. And he said I'm part of something bigger, but he wouldn't tell me what." Keisha's eyes narrowed. She'd always been protective, especially after Jaden's dad walked out when he was 5. "You, be careful," she said, her voice firm. "People don't just hand out notes and talk like that for no reason." Jaden knew she was right, but he couldn't let it go. The note, the call, the meeting, it all felt like a puzzle he was meant to solve. That night, he dreamed of a forest he'd never seen, dark and endless, with shadows moving just out of sight. When he woke up, his heart was racing, and the business card was still on his nightstand, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Or maybe that was just his imagination. Back in Pine Hollow, Ellen Wade was starting to question her own instincts. She'd always trusted science, data, evidence, things she could measure. But the wildlife camera footage was shaking her. She'd gone back to Blackthorn Ridge with Clara to set up more cameras, and the whole time, she felt like they were being watched. Not by animals, by something else. Clara noticed it too, though she didn't say it out loud. The two women worked in silence, securing the cameras to trees, but every rustle in the bushes made them jump. When they finished, Clara pulled Ellen aside. "You've been out here longer than me," she said. "You ever see anything off?" Ellen hesitated. She wanted to say no, to stick to what she knew, but the memory of her grandfather's story stopped her. "Not like this," she admitted. "But my granddad, he used to talk about things in these woods. Things that didn't belong." Clara's eyes sharpened, but she didn't push. Instead, she handed Ellen a radio. "Stay in touch out here, and don't go alone." Ellen nodded, but she was already thinking about the next time she'd come back. She needed answers, even if they scared her. Jenny, on the other hand, was done waiting for answers. She'd taken the scrap of fabric to a friend in Richmond, a lab tech who owed her a favor. The tech confirmed it was from a jacket, likely a child's, and there were traces of dirt and pine sap on it, consistent with Blackthorn Ridge. But there was something else, a faint chemical residue, something the tech couldn't identify, without more tests. Jenny's mind raced. Chemicals? In Moyne, the middle of the forest? She didn't know what it meant, but it was a lead, and she wasn't letting it go. She started digging into old records about the ridge, spending hours in the town library, flipping through dusty files. Most of it was boring land surveys, logging permits, but one report caught her eye. Back in the 80s, a company called Horizon Industries had leased a chunk of land near Blackthorn Ridge related to a missing hiker near a place called Blackthorn Ridge. Jaden's breath caught. He didn't know where Blackthorn Ridge was, but he knew it meant something. He just didn't know what. Jenny's hands trembled as she backed away from the rusted hatch, the low hum vibrating through the forest like a pulse. The logo, Horizon, stared up at her from the metal, its faded lines sharp against the dirt and leaves. The sound was everywhere now, wrapping around her, making her skin prickle. She gripped the knife in her boot, her eyes scanning the darkening trees of Blackthorn Ridge. The forest felt alive, not with the usual chatter of birds or rustle of squirrels, but with something heavier, something watching. She wanted to pry open the hatch, to see what it hid, but that hum, too close, too unnatural, stopped her. Her pocket felt heavy with the scrap of Emma's jacket, a reminder of why she was here. She wasn't leaving without answers, but she wasn't stupid either. She took a step back, then another, her boots crunching on the frosty ground. The hum faded, but the feeling of being watched didn't. As she reached the trailhead, her phone buzzed, a text from her lab tech friend in Richmond. "Chemical residue is synthetic. Not natural. Need more time to ID it." Jenny's stomach twisted. Synthetic chemicals in the middle of nowhere? That hatch, that name, that sound, it was all connected, and it was leading her somewhere dark. In Pine Hollow, the town was on edge. The leaked wildlife camera footage had turned the Carters' disappearance into a national obsession, with true crime podcasters and amateur sleuths flooding the diner and clogging the streets. Sheriff Hargrove was barely holding it together, snapping at reporters who shoved microphones in his face. "We're doing our job," he growled at a particularly pushy one, his voice rough with exhaustion. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling. Dr. Clara Voss had shown him her latest findings. The shadows in the footage weren't just moving. They were communicating. She'd isolated faint audio from the video, a series of clicks and hums that didn't match any known animal. "This isn't wildlife," she said, her eyes locked on his. "And it's not human either." Hargrove wanted to argue, to cling to reason, but he'd grown up in these mountains. He'd heard the stories. His own dad used to talk about Blackthorn Ridge like it was cursed. Now, with Clara's data and that leaked footage, he was starting to wonder if the old man had been right. He radioed his deputies, ordering them to double the patrols at the trailhead. "No one goes up there tonight," he said. But he knew Jenny wouldn't listen. Ellen Wade was wrestling with her own doubts. She'd spent her career studying bears, tracking their patterns, knowing every inch of these woods. But the new cameras she'd set up with Clara were picking up things that didn't make sense. One had caught a glimpse of something tall and thin, slipping through the trees just before dawn. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a person. It moved like liquid, too smooth for anything natural. She sat in her office, replaying the clip until her eyes burned, trying to convince herself it was a glitch. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Her grandfather's stories echoed in her head, tales of shadows that didn't belong, of people who went into the ridge and never came out. She'd laughed them off as a kid, but now, with the Carters gone and that footage haunting her, she was scared. She called Clara, her voice shaky. "We need to go back up there," she said. "Tomorrow. At first light." Clara didn't hesitate. "Bring a radio. And a weapon." Ellen didn't own a gun, but she dug out her old hunting knife from a drawer. She wasn't taking chances. In the city, Jaden was spiraling. The newspaper he'd found at the bus stop, the one about the missing hiker from 1987, had a grainy photo of Blackthorn Ridge, and it matched the forest from his dream. He couldn't explain it, but the connection felt real, like a thread pulling him towards something he didn't understand. He'd kept the business card with Horizon on it, turning it over in his hands every night, but he hadn't called Mr. Ellis back. The man's words, "You're part of something bigger," kept looping in his head, mixing with the image of the woman on the bus and that note. Keisha was getting worried, catching him staring out the window like he was waiting for something. "You gotta talk to me, Jaden," she said one night, her voice soft but firm. He showed her the newspaper, told her about the article about Blackthorn Ridge. Her face went still. "That's too far for a coincidence," she said. "You think this has something to do with that note?" Jaden didn't know, but he was starting to think the woman on the bus wasn't random. He pulled out his phone and typed Horizon Industries Blackthorn Ridge into the search bar. One hit, a forum post from years ago, buried deep, mentioning a research facility that shut down after incidents. No details, just a warning. Stay away from the ridge. His heart sank. Back in Pine Hollow, Jenny was planning her next move. She hadn't told anyone about the hatch, not even Clara or Ellen. It felt too big, too dangerous, and she didn't trust anyone else to handle it right. She'd gone back to the library, digging deeper into Horizon Industries. The records were sparse, but she found a name, Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a scientist who'd worked for Horizon in the 80s. The name was linked to a patent for a synthetic compound, something about environmental adaptation. It was all jargon, but it matched the chemical residue on Emma's jacket. Jenny's blood ran cold. Was Horizon connected to her family's disappearance? She tracked down an address for Evelyn Marsh, an old house on the outskirts of Richmond, but when she called, the number was disconnected. She decided to go anyway. If this woman knew something, Jenny was going to find out, even if she had to knock on her door in the middle of the night. The next morning, Clara and Ellen headed back to Blackthorn Ridge, armed with radios and a map of the new camera locations. The air was colder now, the sky heavy with clouds that promised snow. They moved carefully, checking each camera, but the tension between them was thick. Every snap of a twig made them freeze, their hands hovering near their knives. At the third camera, they found something. The lens was smeared with a sticky, grayish substance like someone or something had tried to cover it. Clara scraped a sample into a vial, her hands steady, but her face pale. "This isn't natural," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ellen didn't respond, but she was thinking about the hum Jenny had mentioned in passing, the one she hadn't wanted to talk about. They kept moving, deeper into the ridge, until they reached the spot where the original footage was taken. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on them. That's when they saw it, a faint trail, barely visible, leading to a cluster of rocks that didn't look natural. They were too neatly arranged, like they were hiding something. Clara reached for her radio, but before she could speak, the hum started, low, guttural, coming from all directions. They locked eyes, their breath visible in the cold air. "We need to go," Ellen whispered. But neither of them moved. In Richmond, Jenny pulled up to Evelyn Marsh's house, a crumbling Victorian with boarded-up windows. It looked abandoned, but a faint light flickered through a crack in one of the boards. She knocked, her heart pounding, but no one answered. She tried the door, locked. She circled the house, peering through gaps in the boards, and saw shelves lined with files and old equipment, like a lab that time forgot. Her phone buzzed again, another text from her lab tech friend. Compound matches a discontinued chemical from the 80s. Used for experiments. Dangerous. Be careful. Jenny's stomach dropped. She was about to leave when she heard it, a hum, just like the one on the ridge, coming from inside the house. She froze, her hand on her knife, as a shadow moved behind the boarded window. Someone was in there. Or something. Jaden, back in the city, was starting to feel like he was being followed. He'd noticed the same black sedan parked outside his apartment twice that week, and yesterday, a man in a hoodie had watched him from across the street. He hadn't told Keisha she'd make him stay home, and he couldn't do that.
Not now.
He'd found another clue. A library book he'd checked out on local history mentioned Horizon Industries in passing, linking it to unexplained activity in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The book was old, its pages yellowed, but it had a map with a marked location, Blackthorn Ridge. Jaden's hands shook as he traced the map with his finger. He didn't know how he was connected to this, but he couldn't ignore it anymore. He called Mr. Ellis's number again, and this time, the man answered on the first ring. "You're getting close, Jaden," he said, his voice calm but edged with something sharp. "Come to Pine Hollow.
Tomorrow.
You'll find what you're looking for." The line went dead. Jaden stared at his phone, his mind racing. Pine Hollow, Blackthorn Ridge, Horizon. It was all coming together, and he was terrified. In Pine Hollow, the town was holding its breath. The diner was packed with people watching the news, where a reporter was talking about the latest search efforts. Sheriff Hargrove had called in state police to help, but they were struggling to keep up with the crowds. A group of teenagers had been caught trying to live stream from the ridge, and one of them swore they'd heard a hum before their camera died. The sheriff dismissed it, but Clara and Ellen exchanged a look. They'd heard it too. That night, Clara stayed late at the station, going through old Horizon Industries files she dug up from a state archive. Most were redacted, but one name kept popping up: Evelyn Marsh. Clara's pulse quickened. She didn't know Jenny was already on her way to Marsh's house, chasing the same lead. And neither of them knew that Jaden was packing a bag, telling Keisha he was going to a friend's for the weekend. He didn't tell her about Pine Hollow. He didn't want her to stop him. On Blackthorn Ridge, the hum was back, louder now, echoing through the trees as the sun dipped below the horizon. Clara and Ellen were still there, frozen by the rocks, their radios useless as static drowned out their calls. The air was thick, the hum pulsing like a heartbeat. Something was coming, and they could feel it. Jenny, miles away, was circling Marsh's house, her knife drawn, as the hum grew louder inside. Jaden was on a bus, heading toward Pine Hollow, the business card in his pocket and the newspaper article in his bag. The mountains loomed in the distance, dark and silent, holding secrets that were about to break free. Whatever was out there, on the ridge, in the house, in the shadows, was closing in, and no one was ready for what came next. The hum on Blackthorn Ridge was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, thick and oppressive, wrapping around Clara and Ellen like a fog. The rocks they stood by seemed to pulse with it, the air so heavy it was hard to breathe. Clara's hand tightened on her radio, static hissing through the speaker, while Ellen clutched her hunting knife, her eyes darting to the trees. The hum grew louder, sharper, almost like a voice trying to form words. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The silence was deafening, broken only by a faint rustle from the rocks. Clara stepped forward, her boots crunching on the frost, and pushed aside a loose stone. Beneath it was a metal grate, rusted but new compared to Jenny's hatch, with the same Horizon logo etched into it. Her breath caught. "Ellen," she whispered, "this isn't natural." Before Ellen could respond, a shadow flickered at the edge of their vision, tall, too tall, moving with that same liquid smoothness from the camera footage. They froze, hearts pounding, as it slipped into the trees. Clara grabbed Ellen's arm, pulling her back toward the trail. "We're not ready for this," she hissed. But as they retreated, Clara's radio crackled to life, not with static, but with a voice, faint and distorted, saying one word: "Carter." They ran, the hum starting again behind them, chasing them down the ridge. In Richmond, Jenny was still outside Evelyn Marsh's house, her knife in one hand, her phone in the other. The hum from inside was louder now, vibrating through the boarded-up windows. She'd seen the shadow move, and it wasn't human. It was too sharp, too angular, like a silhouette cut from something darker than the night. Her lab text about the dangerous chemical was burning in her mind, and the Horizon logo on that hatch in the woods was too much to ignore. She circled to the back of the house, finding a loose board over a window. Her hands shook as she pried it off, the wood splintering under her grip. Inside, the house was a maze of dust-covered shelves, old lab equipment, and stacks of files labeled Horizon Industries, Project Eclipse. She slipped through the gap, her flashlight cutting through the dark. The hum was coming from a door at the far end of the room, half hidden behind a bookcase. As she reached for it, a photo slipped from one of the files, landing at her feet. She picked it up and froze. It was Sarah, smiling with Mike and the kids, taken years ago. Scrawled on the back in faded ink. Test Group 47. Jenny's blood ran cold. Her family wasn't just missing, they were part of something. Jaden's bus rolled into Pine Hollow just after midnight, the town's lights dim under a heavy sky. He'd lied to Keisha about where he was going and the guilt gnawed at him, but he couldn't stop now. The newspaper article about the 1987 hiker, the forum post about Horizon Industries, Mr. Ellis's cryptic words, it all pointed here. He stepped off the bus, clutching his backpack, the business card with Horizon tucked inside. The air was cold, sharper than the city, and the streets were eerily quiet, except for the faint hum he swore he heard in the distance. He didn't know where to start, but the diner's neon sign was the only thing open, so he headed there. Inside, a few locals were hunched over coffee, whispering about the Carters and the wildlife camera footage. Jaden caught snippets, shadows, strange noises, Blackthorn Ridge. He slid into a booth, pretending to check his phone, but his ears were on the conversation. A waitress, her name tag reading Marge, noticed him. "You're not from here," she said, pouring him coffee he hadn't ordered. "You chasing that story too?" Jaden hesitated, then nodded. "Something like that." Marge leaned in, her voice low. "Be careful, kid. Folks who go looking up there don't always come back." She slid a napkin across the counter with an address scribbled on it. "Old Gus lives here. He knows more than he says in public." Sheriff Hargrove was at the station, his desk buried under maps and reports. Clara and Ellen had just burst in, breathless, telling him about the great and the voice on the radio. "Carter," Clara repeated, her voice shaking. It said Carter. Hargrove's face went pale. He'd been avoiding the truth, telling himself the Carters got lost or hurt, but this was different. He pulled out a file he'd kept hidden, one he hadn't shown Clara or anyone else. It was from his dad, a sheriff in the 80s, detailing a case involving Horizon Industries. A hiker had gone missing on Blackthorn Ridge, and Horizon had been questioned. They'd been running experiments, something about biological adaptation. The file was incomplete, redacted in places, but it mentioned a facility under the ridge, sealed after an accident. Hargrove hadn't wanted to believe it, but the great, the hum, the shadows, it was all too much. "We need to get up there," he said, grabbing his coat. Clara stopped him. "Not tonight. Whatever's out there, it's awake now. We go in morning, with backup." Hargrove nodded, but he knew Jenny wouldn't wait. He'd seen her sneaking off to the ridge before, and he was starting to think she knew more than she was saying. Jenny was deep in Evelyn Marsh's house now, her flashlight shaking as she pushed open the door where the hum was loudest. It led to a basement, the air damp and heavy with the smell of chemicals. The hum was deafening here, coming from a machine in the corner, a rusted, boxy thing with wires snaking into the floor. On a table nearby were more files, some stamped Project Eclipse. Phase 2. She flipped through them, her heart racing. The pages talked about subjects and environmental integration, with charts showing human DNA mixed with something else, something not human. One page had a list of names, and there, halfway down, was Carter family. Jenny's knees buckled. She found another photo, this one recent, showing Mike, Sarah, Emma, and Liam in what looked like a lab, their faces blank, like they were asleep. The date was 2 weeks ago. They were alive, or had been. But where? And what had Horizon done to them? Before she could read more, the hum spiked, and the machine sparked, sending a jolt through the room. Jenny stumbled back, her flashlight dropping, and in the flickering light, she saw it, a shadow, tall and angular, standing at the top of the stairs. It didn't move, but it was watching her. Jaden found Gus's house at the edge of town, a rundown cabin with a single light on. He knocked, half expecting no answer, but the door creaked open, revealing an old man with a weathered face and sharp eyes. "You're the city kid," Gus said, like he'd been expecting him. Jaden didn't ask how he knew. "I need to know about Blackthorn Ridge," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. Gus motioned him inside, locking the door behind him. The cabin was cluttered with old maps and photos, some showing the ridge decades ago. Gus sat him down and started talking not about myths this time but facts. Horizon was up there in the 80s, he said. Doing things they shouldn't. Experiments. Not on animals, on people. They said it was for science, but it went wrong. People disappeared. And whatever they made, it's still out there. He pulled out a grainy photo, showing a figure on the ridge, tall, thin, moving like the shadows in the footage. Jaden's stomach dropped. Why me? He asked. Gus leaned closer. You got a note, didn't you? Horizon's still watching. They pick people, always have. You're one of M. Jaden's hand went to the business card in his pocket, the word Horizon burning under his fingers. Clara and Ellen were back at the station, trying to piece together what they'd seen. The grate, the voice, the shadow, it was all connected to Horizon. They were sure of it. Clara had found a reference to Project Eclipse in an old report, buried in the state archives. It was vague, mentioning synthetic integration and test groups, but one line stood out. Subjects exhibit enhanced perception, but containment is critical. Containment. The word sent a shiver through her. Were the Carters subjects? And what did enhanced perception mean? Ellen was quieter, her mind on the chemical residue Clara had found on the camera lens. She'd sent it to a lab, but her gut told her it was the same as what Jenny's friend had found on the fabric. We're missing something, Ellen said, her voice low. Horizon didn't just leave. They're still here. Clara nodded, her eyes on the map of Blackthorn Ridge. There was a spot marked in red, near the grate they'd found.
We go at dawn, she said.
And we bring everything we've got. Jenny was trapped in the basement, the shadow at the top of the stairs blocking her only exit. The hum was so loud it made her head throb, and the machine was sparking now, casting erratic light across the room. She grabbed the files, stuffing them into her jacket, and edged toward the wall, her knife raised. The shadow didn't move, but she could feel its eyes, or whatever it had, on her. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't dare look. She took a step, then another, her back against the cold concrete. The shadow tilted its head, and for a split second, she swore it looked like Mike, his silhouette, his posture. Mike, she whispered, her voice breaking. The shadow didn't answer, but it stepped forward, and the hum spiked, shaking the walls. Jenny bolted for a side door she hadn't seen before, slamming it open and stumbling into a tunnel, dark, narrow, and smelling of earth and chemicals. She ran, the hum chasing her, the files clutched to her chest. She didn't know where the tunnel led, but she knew one thing. She was closer to her family than ever, and she wasn't turning back. Jaden left Gus's cabin with more questions than answers, the old man's words ringing in his ears. They pick people. He didn't know what Horizon wanted with him, but he was in Pine Hollow now, and Blackthorn Ridge was calling. He checked into a cheap motel, his phone buzzing with a text from Keisha. Where are you? Call me. He didn't reply. Instead, he pulled out the newspaper article and the business card, laying them side by side. The hum he'd heard at the bus stop was faint, but it was there, like a signal pulling him toward the ridge. He didn't sleep that night, his mind racing with images of shadows, forests, and a family he'd never met but felt tied to. At dawn, he'd head to the ridge, not knowing Clara and Ellen were planning the same thing, or that Jenny was already underground, running toward answers that might destroy her. The hum was everywhere now, linking them all, Jenny, Clara, Ellen, Jaden, and the Carters, in a web that was tightening, ready to snap. Jenny's breath burned in her lungs as she ran through the tunnel, the hum pounding in her ears like a heartbeat. The narrow passage smelled of damp earth and chemicals, the walls slick with condensation. Her flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows, but she clutched the Horizon Industries files tighter, her knife still in her other hand. The tunnel sloped downward, deeper into the earth beneath Blackthorn Ridge, and the air grew colder, heavier. She didn't know where she was going, but the photo of her family, Mike, Sarah, Emma, and Liam, dated just 2 weeks ago, kept her moving. The hum spiked, and she stumbled, catching herself against the wall. Up ahead, a faint glow spilled from an opening. She slowed, her heart racing, and crept forward. The tunnel opened into a cavernous room, lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Machines lined the walls, humming and sparking, their wires tangled like veins. In the center, 4 figures sat in chairs, strapped in, their eyes closed. It was them, the Carters. Jenny's knees nearly gave out. Sarah, she whispered, rushing forward, but before she could reach them, a figure stepped from the shadows, tall, angular, its movements too smooth, too wrong. It wasn't human, not entirely, but its face flickered with something familiar. Mike's face. Stop, it said, its voice a distorted echo. Jenny froze, her knife raised, realizing she'd found her family, but they weren't alone. At dawn, Clara and Ellen led a team of state police to Blackthorn Ridge, their radios crackling with static. Sheriff Hargrove was with them, his face grim as he gripped his rifle. The grate they'd found the night before was their target, its Horizon logo glinting in the early light. Clara's sample of the grayish residue had come back from the lab, a synthetic compound, banned decades ago, linked to Horizon's Project Eclipse. It's not just chemicals, she told the team. It's biological. They were experimenting on people. The words hung heavy as they pried open the grate, revealing a tunnel that matched Jenny's. They descended, the hum growing louder, vibrating through the stone. Ellen's knife felt useless in her hand, but she kept moving, driven by the memory of the Carters' faces on those missing posters. The tunnel led to the same cavern Jenny had found, and they burst in just as she faced the shadow figure. "Jenny!" Clara shouted, but the figure turned, its eyes glowing faintly, and the hum became a deafening roar. The police raised their weapons, but Clara yelled, "Wait! It's not what you think." The figure didn't attack. It just stood there, watching, as if sizing them up. Jaden was already on the ridge, having slipped past the deputies in the pre-dawn dark. Gus's words, "they pick people," echoed in his head, but he didn't know why he was here, only that he had to be. The hum had guided him, faint but persistent, like a signal only he could hear. He'd found a second entrance, another hatch hidden under a pile of leaves, and climbed down, his heart pounding. The tunnel was tight, the air thick with that same chemical smell Jenny had noticed. When he reached the cavern, he saw the chaos unfolding. Jenny, knife raised, facing the shadow figure. Clara, Ellen, and the police, weapons drawn, and the Carters, strapped to chairs, their faces pale but alive. Jaden's eyes locked on the shadow figure, and his breath caught. It wasn't just Mike's face, it flickered with others, faces he didn't recognize, like a projection cycling through memories. Then, for a split second, it wore his face. He stumbled back, the business card falling from his pocket. "Horizon," he whispered, and the figure turned toward him, its glowing eyes narrowing. The cavern erupted into chaos. The shadow figure moved, not toward Jenny or the police, but toward the machines, its hands, or whatever they were, reaching for a panel. Clara shouted, "It's activating something." The hum spiked, and the machines sparked violently, screens flickering with data. Project Eclipse. Integration complete. Jenny lunged for her family, cutting the straps on Sarah's chair with her knife. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, confused, her voice weak. "Jenny? Where are we?" Before Jenny could answer, the shadow figure pressed the panel, and a low rumble shook the cavern. The Carters stirred, their movements sluggish, but their eyes, something was wrong. They glowed faintly, just like the figures. Ellen gasped, backing away. "What did they do to them?" she whispered. Clara's mind raced, piecing together the files she'd read. Horizon had been blending human DNA with something else, something synthetic, to create beings that could survive extreme environments, like Blackthorn Ridge. The Carters were test subjects, and the shadow figure, it was one of them, or what they'd become. Jaden stepped forward, his voice shaking but firm. "Stop it," he shouted at the figure. It paused, its head tilting, and for a moment, it spoke in his voice. "You're one of us," it said. Jaden's blood ran cold. He remembered the note, Mr. Ellis, the woman on the bus. "I'm not," he said, but doubt crept in. The figure reached for him, and Jenny tackled it, her knife flashing. The figure didn't fight back. It just dissolved, its form breaking into a swarm of tiny, shimmering particles that scattered into the air. The hum stopped, and the machines powered down, their screens going dark. The Carters slumped in their chairs, the glow fading from their eyes. Sarah grabbed Jenny's hand, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't know," she whispered. "They took us, said it was for science." Mike stirred, his voice hoarse. "They wanted us to be something else." Emma and Liam clung to their parents, sobbing, but they were alive. Jenny held them, her own tears falling, but her eyes kept darting to the shadows, waiting for the figure to reform. Clara and the police secured the cavern, unplugging the machines and collecting the files. Sheriff Hargrove radioed for medics to check the Carters, who were weak but coherent. The files confirmed Clara's fears. Project Eclipse was Horizon's attempt to create hybrid beings, blending human DNA with a synthetic compound to survive in hostile environments, like Blackthorn Ridge. The shadow figures were the first successes, but they were unstable, uncontainable. The Carters were part of a new phase, meant to be fully integrated, but the project had been abandoned, or so Horizon claimed. The cavern was a leftover, still active, guarded by whatever those figures had become. Ellen found a logbook detailing test subjects, and Jaden's name was there, marked pending. He stared at it, his hands shaking. "Why me?" he asked Clara. She didn't have an answer, but she noticed his eyes, faintly glowing, just for a second, before returning to normal. As the medics arrived, the Carters were carried out, weak but alive, and Jenny stayed by their side, refusing to let go. Clara and Ellen cataloged the equipment, their minds reeling. The sheriff sealed the cavern, declaring it a restricted site, but he knew the truth wouldn't stay buried. Jaden stood at the edge of the cavern, staring at the spot where the shadow figure had dissolved. He felt different, like something inside him had shifted. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You're not done, Jaden. Horizon never ends." He deleted it, but the hum was still there, faint, in the back of his mind. The Carters were safe. The cavern was shut down, and Horizon's secrets were exposed, but as Jaden walked out into the dawn light, he saw a shadow flicker in the trees, too tall, too smooth. It was gone in an instant, but it left a chill that wouldn't fade. Horizon was still out there, watching, and Jaden knew he wasn't free yet. The dawn light filtered through the pines of Blackthorn Ridge as the medics carried the Carters out of the cavern, their faces pale but alive. Jenny clung to Sarah's hand, her sister's grip weak but steady, a lifeline after weeks of fear. Mike leaned on a medic, his arm around Emma, who clutched Liam tightly. Their eyes no longer glowed, but there was a haunted look in them, like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. Jenny's heart ached with relief, but the weight of the Horizon files stuffed in her jacket kept her grounded. The cavern was silent now, the hum gone, the machines dark. Clara and Ellen followed the group out, their faces grim as they carried boxes of documents and samples. Sheriff Hargrove stayed behind, securing the entrance with police tape, his hands shaking slightly. He'd lived in Pine Hollow his whole life, but this was the first time he felt like the mountains were hiding something he couldn't fight. Jaden trailed behind, his backpack slung over one shoulder, the business card with Horizon still in his pocket. That text, "You're not done, Jaden. Horizon never ends," burned in his mind. He glanced at the trees, half expecting another shadow to flicker, but the ridge was quiet. Too quiet. Back in Pine Hollow, the town was waking up to the news. The diner buzzed with locals, their coffee forgotten as they whispered about the Carters' return. Marge, the waitress, poured refills with a shaky hand, her eyes darting to the TV where a reporter stood outside the sheriff's station, talking about a breakthrough in the case. The leaked wildlife camera footage was still circulating online, fueling theories about what had happened on Blackthorn Ridge. Some said it was aliens, others a government cover-up, but the truth was stranger and scarier than any of them guessed. Clara and Ellen sat in a corner booth, sorting through the Horizon files they'd salvaged. Project Eclipse was laid bare, a decades-old experiment to blend human DNA with a synthetic compound, creating beings that could survive extreme conditions. The shadow figures were the first attempts, unstable, unpredictable, left to roam the ridge after Horizon shut down. The Carters were part of a second phase, meant to be more stable, but the project had collapsed, leaving them trapped in that cavern. They were trying to make superhumans, Clara said, her voice low. Ellen shook her head. Or something not human at all. Jenny stayed with her family at the local clinic, where doctors checked their vitals and ran tests. Sarah was quiet, her hands folded in her lap as she recounted what she could remember. "We went hiking," she said, her voice soft. "Then, lights. Bright lights. And voices telling us it was for science. They said we'd be okay." Mike filled in gaps, his voice rough. "They took us underground. Gave us shots. I thought we were dreaming, but it was real." Emma and Liam were quieter, curled up together on a hospital bed, but they nodded when asked about the machines and the hum. The doctors found traces of the same synthetic compound in their blood, the one from Emma's jacket, from the camera lens. It was fading, thank God, but it left marks, faint scars on their arms, a slight tremor in their hands. Jenny listened, her heart breaking, but she couldn't shake the image of that shadow figure with Mike's face. "What were those things?" she asked a doctor. He didn't answer, just exchanged a look with another medic. Jenny knew they were out of their depth. Jaden couldn't stay still. He'd slipped out of the diner and headed to the motel, his mind racing. His name in that logbook, pending, haunted him. He sat on the lumpy bed, staring at the business card. The woman on the bus, Mr. Ellis, the hum. It all led him here, to Pine Hollow, to the Carters.
But why?
He thought about calling Keisha, telling her everything, but his phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Check your bag." His stomach dropped. He unzipped his backpack and found something he hadn't packed, a small, silver vial, no bigger than a thumb drive, tucked in a side pocket. It was cold to the touch, and when he held it up, a faint glow pulsed inside, like the eyes of the shadow figure. He dropped it, his hands shaking. The hum started again, faint in his head, not the room. He grabbed his phone and called Keisha, his voice breaking. "Ma, I'm in trouble," he said.
She didn't hesitate.
"Tell me where you are. I'm coming." He gave her the address, then sat there, staring at the vial, knowing he'd been marked long before he got on that bus. Clara and Ellen took the Horizon files to the sheriff's station, where Hargrove was briefing the state police. The cavern was sealed, but they all knew it wasn't over. The files mentioned other facilities, other test groups, scattered across the country. Project Eclipse hadn't just been on Blackthorn Ridge, it was bigger, and Horizon Industries, or whatever was left of it, was still out there. Clara found a name in the files, Evelyn Marsh, the scientist Jenny had tracked down. She called Jenny, who was still at the clinic, and told her about the connection. I was at her house, Jenny said, her voice tight. She's gone, but I found files. Project Eclipse. My family was in them. Clara's heart sank. Stay with your family, she said. We're handling this. But she knew Jenny wouldn't stay put. Sure enough, Jenny was already planning to go back to Marsh's house to find the woman who might know why her family was targeted. Jaden met Keisha at the bus station in Pine Hollow that afternoon, his face pale as he hugged her. She didn't ask questions, just held him tight, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was looking for threats. You're okay now, she said, but Jaden shook his head. He showed her the vial, told her about the note, Mr. Ellis, and the logbook. Keisha's face hardened. We're not staying here, she said. We're going home, and we're figuring this out. But as they walked to her car, Jaden felt the hum again, stronger now, and his vision blurred for a second, his eyes flashing with that faint glow. Keisha didn't notice, but he did, and it terrified him. He didn't tell her about the text, about Horizon's warning that they weren't done. He didn't want her to know he might not be free. Jenny slipped away from the clinic that evening, leaving Sarah and the kids with Mike. She drove back to Richmond, to Evelyn Marsh's house, her hands tight on the wheel. The files she'd taken from the basement were in her passenger seat, their pages filled with terms she barely understood. Genetic integration, synthetic consciousness, containment protocols. But one thing was clear. Horizon had been experimenting on people for decades, and the Carters were just the latest. When she reached the house, it was dark, the boarded windows like blind eyes. She broke in again, her flashlight sweeping the dusty lab. The machine in the basement was silent now, but she found a hidden panel behind it, revealing a safe. Her hands shook as she tried the lock, using Sarah's birthday as the code. It clicked open, and inside was a single file, marked Final Report, Eclipse Termination. It detailed the shutdown of the project in 1989 after uncontrollable anomalies escaped. The shadow figures. But there was more, a list of active agents still monitoring test subjects. Mr. Ellis's name was there, along with a photo of the woman from Jaden's bus. Jaden and Keisha were back in the city by nightfall, the vial hidden in Jaden's sock drawer. He hadn't told Keisha about the hum in his head, or the way his reflection sometimes looked off, like his eyes weren't his own. She was already digging into Horizon, using her hospital contacts to track down anyone who might know about experimental compounds. One nurse, an old friend, remembered a scandal in the 80s about a company testing drugs without consent. They disappeared after that, she said. But people said they never really left. Keisha didn't tell Jaden, not wanting to scare him, but she started locking the doors at night, something she'd never done before. Jaden, meanwhile, couldn't stop thinking about the Carters. He'd seen them in that cavern, seen what Horizon had done. Was that his future? He Googled Blackthorn Ridge again, finding a new post on a conspiracy forum. Horizon's back. They're watching us. Attached was a blurry photo of a shadow figure, taken just days ago, near Pine Hollow. In Pine Hollow, the Carters were recovering, but it wasn't easy. Sarah couldn't sleep, plagued by dreams of the cavern and that hum. Mike was quieter, staring out windows like he was waiting for something. Emma started drawing again, but her sketches were of shadows, not landscapes. Liam kicked a soccer ball, but he never strayed far from the house. Jenny moved to Pine Hollow, renting a place nearby to keep watch. She didn't trust the calm, didn't believe Horizon was gone. She kept the files, reading them late at night, looking for clues about what Marsh meant by what's coming. The hum never returned, but she felt it sometimes in her dreams. Jaden woke up that night, the hum louder than ever. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water on his face, but his reflection wasn't right. His eyes glowed, not faintly this time, but bright, like the shadow figures. He screamed, and Keisha ran in, grabbing him. "What's wrong?" she cried. He couldn't speak, just pointed at the mirror. She didn't see it, his eyes looked normal to her. But Jaden knew. Horizon had done something to him, maybe years ago, maybe through that woman on the bus. He told Keisha everything. The hum, the vial, the logbook. She didn't hesitate. "We're leaving," she said. "Out of the city. Somewhere they can't find us." But as they packed, Jaden's phone buzzed again. "You can't run from us." He threw it against the wall, shattering the screen, but the hum didn't stop. Clara and Ellen drove to Richmond the next day, following Jenny's lead. They found Marsh's house empty, the safe open, the note gone. But Clara noticed something, a faint hum, coming from the ground. She dug through the dirt in the yard, finding another hatch, smaller, unmarked. Inside was a single machine, still active, its screen showing a map with dots, hundreds of them, scattered across the country. Each dot was a name, a test subject. Jaden's was there, glowing brighter than the rest. Clara shut it down, but she knew it wasn't enough. Horizon wasn't just a company, it was a network, still alive, still watching. She called the feds, handing over the last file, but she kept the map in her head. She'd find them one by one if she had to. The Carters went home a week later, their house feeling both familiar and strange. Sarah planted flowers in the yard, trying to reclaim normalcy, while Mike took up woodworking, his hands steadier when he focused. Emma started drawing again, but her sketches were of shadows, not landscapes. Liam kicked his soccer ball, but he never strayed far from the house. Jenny moved to Pine Hollow, renting a place nearby to keep watch. She didn't trust the calm, didn't believe Horizon was gone. She kept the files, reading them late at night, looking for clues about what Marsh meant by what's coming. The hum never returned, but she felt it sometimes in her dreams. Jaden and Keisha moved to a small town in the Midwest, far from Pine Hollow, far from the city. He didn't hear the hum anymore, but he checked his reflection every day, waiting for that glow. It never came, but he never felt safe. Keisha got a new job at a hospital, and Jaden enrolled in community college, trying to focus on the future. But he kept the vial, hidden in a lockbox, just in case. One night, he got a letter. No return address, just a single line. You're still part of it. He burned it, but he couldn't burn the truth. Horizon had marked him, and he'd spent his life looking over his shoulder. Pine Hollow tried to heal. The diner filled with locals again, the news vans left, and the wildlife cameras went back to tracking bears. Clara and Ellen stayed in touch, working quietly to track down Horizon's remaining sites. They never found Marsh, but they found others, people like Jaden, marked without knowing why. The Carters' story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that some secrets are better left buried. But for those who'd been in that cavern, who'd heard the hum, the world felt different. They knew something was out there, watching, waiting. And as the seasons changed, a faint hum echoed on Blackthorn Ridge, too soft for anyone to hear. Or so they thought. The takeaway? Kindness, like Jaden's on that bus, can spark something bigger than you expect. Sometimes a miracle, sometimes a mystery. The Carters were found because Jenny never gave up, because Clara and Ellen kept digging, because Jaden followed a note to a truth he didn't want. But the world's full of shadows, and not all of them stay hidden. So, next time you're out there in the woods or on a crowded bus, keep your eyes open. You never know who's watching or what they want.